From Two Comma Media, it's Give 'em the Business, a show about Black entrepreneurs and business leaders sharing their stories of adversity and success. I'm Troy Evans, and on today's show, how Julius Hollis co-founded Air Atlanta and rose to prominence with J.H. Hollis and Company. Julius, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Troy. I'm glad to be here with you this evening. You're looking good, my man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You too. It's been a while, but I'm glad to be in the same room with you.
Likewise. And welcome back to Atlanta.
Thank you. So, if you don't mind, I want to dive in, and you've got such a history and very interesting and long story to tell. So I want to make sure we get as much of it in as possible. But and a lot of it, I've known you for several years now, but I even learned more about it in reading the book you put out about your brother in the arena. And so one of the things that kind of struck me in the beginning was the role that family played, as well as the role that Atlanta played in shaping your direction. Can you tell me a little bit more about the influence family and Atlanta had on you?
Oh, it was tremendous. My family has been the cornerstone of my life and my siblings. And today, as the head of my family, I have implanted that in my kids. And so family has played a significant role, both immediate family and extended family, for me personally in Atlanta. I come from a large family network. We had 5 kids in our family that my mother and grandmother raised, and then I had a slew of cousins, about 15 or 20 cousins in one family. So we've all supported each other over the years in all our different endeavors, and we grew up empowering each other. We grew up as young men and women in a segregated Atlanta during the 50s and 60s, during the upheaval of the civil rights movement. So we were the first benefactors of that beloved community that Dr. King, John Lewis, and Andy Young and C.T. Vivian and all gave their lives to create. So from that emerged a community in Atlanta that's unparalleled because of the leadership of Maynard Jackson, Leroy Johnson, and so many others who were public elected officials that made it possible for all of us as who've been lucky to be dubbed entrepreneurs to translate this enormous goodwill, this enormous progressive mechanism into one that we transformed into empowering communities, empowering individuals in terms of developing economic empowerment and political empowerment. We leveraged our political strength into creating an economic mecca, which Atlanta is now. It is a black economic mecca. In every country around the world, that's in Africa, that's in the Caribbean, indigenous people in South America, they look to Atlanta because of the movement that Dr. King and Andy Young and Hosea Williams and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis, how they use social civil unrest to create human rights, and from the human rights and civil rights struggles, that translated into political power created by Maynard Jackson and Julian Bonds and so many others that created this great economic empowerment for entrepreneurs like myself.
Right. You mentioned some behemoths in both politics and economics in Atlanta, the Maynard Jacksons, the Julian Bonds, the Andrew Youngs, and you rolled with that group of individuals almost from the beginning, helping them get elected and playing a central part in fundraising for them and what have you. What was it like really coming of age with those individuals?
Well, I was a small piece of this enormous messiah, messiah that we have in Atlanta, and I was very fortunate at a very early age as a student at Morehouse to be and learn from and be involved with Atlanta's black leadership, most of whom came through Morehouse. We'll forgive Andy Young,
Right.
you know,
Howard.
Howard, but we got him on the board, so he gets an honorary pass. But men such as Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was a president of Morehouse for decades, that was Dr. King's mentor. They set the benchmark. They demanded that you excel. You know, often the word is that in Morehouse men often imitated, but can never be duplicated, and that really is a truism. Okay, so coming through Morehouse at a time to see Dr. Mays and men like John Cox, who were head of the Butler Street YMCA, and sitting at the side of those individuals, me as well as thousands of other young men who came through Morehouse or who came into Atlanta, they took us in their arms and we sat at their side and learned. After we learned, we were able to develop our own pathways to contribute to this beloved community, this whole aura of economic empowerment, using political power to create economic empowerment for all of God's children. And that's what my life has been about. Using my political knowledge, transforming that into the belief that, from a business standpoint, because I studied history at Morehouse, and I think one of the most important decisions for me was to attend Morehouse instead of going away to another school, going to somewhere in New England. Not begrudging anybody who went to New England schools, but for me personally, and for a number of young men who went to Morehouse, that laid the foundation for us. The sensitivity, the social consciousness. After Morehouse, like so many others, then we went to graduate schools, medical schools, worked on PhDs, etc. So that gave us really the foundation in terms of understanding who we are and what we need to do as individuals to positively impact communities of color.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, I experienced Morehouse a generation or so after you with the Hugh Gloucesters and the Reverend Otis Mosses on the board and whatnot, and they were very instrumental and impactful in leading me to the Atlanta University Center and especially Morehouse, and that was definitely a game changer in my life. But I want to take it back a little bit further. So you mentioned that you had 5 young children all in the house and some extended family through cousins being raised by your mother and grandmother, and I know that they played a central role in your outlook on life as well as probably your decision to go to Morehouse. Tell me about those influences and what you remember most, and what you took away from those strong women being in your life.
Oh, they were our backbone. My late mother, she taught us always be prepared, to have perseverance, and in perseverance and preparation, when you enter that room with confidence. When you enter that room, no more than the other person that's looking across from you. But when you enter that room, also have a sense of humility. So my mother and my grandmother had a tremendous impact on all of our siblings, and myself and my siblings. As well as here in Atlanta, I have a 107-year-old aunt, Leela Williams, who for years had a marquee restaurant here called Leela's Dinette over by Morehouse College. And I remember as a kid working in that restaurant, probably 8, 9 years old, both Michael and myself, that we saw how people could come together. We would see a cross spectrum of people from Atlanta's black community. We would see postal workers. We would see public workers, garbage workers, police officers. But then we would also see professors from Clark AU, from Morehouse. We would see social activists such as Rap Brown and Carmichael, Julian Bond, Dr. Mays, Vincent Hart, Dr. Henderson from Clark, and politicians. And they would all come in there and enjoy food and fellowship and at a community tables, and everybody would be engaging. So that really set the table for us. Mm-hmm. And I can remember when Michael Hollis came to me, I never forget this. I was in Washington, D.C. I had just left Andy Young as his district director for his congressional office when Carter appointed him in '76 to be the UN ambassador. So I told Andy, I said, look, my man, I think what we need to do, I'm going to go to the Export-Import Bank in Washington, because I think at that time I was completed some additional graduate work at Georgia State in business. And I felt at that time I wanted to transition over to the Exim Bank and really understand global economies, the economies in Africa, the economies in the Caribbean, South America, and Asia. So I went in, got appointed by Carter to the Exim Bank, eventually started managing all of their co-financing projects with AID and with the World Bank in those markets, those underserved markets. And I remember at that time Michael Hollis had left the 3 Mile Island Commission, where he was Deputy General Counsel. He had been appointed by Jimmy Carter. He and President Carter were very close. And Michael walks in my office at Exim Bank after he had left Oppenheimer investment banking firm, where he had gone for 2 years after the 3 Mile Island Commission had expired, and said, he walked in and closed the door and said, let me talk to you, Julius. I said, what's up, my man? He said, I want to start a commercial airline. So I looked at him. I said, wait a minute, I know my brother. He is smart. He's gutsy. I looked at him for about 2 minutes. And then I pulled out. In those days, you didn't have a whiteboard, so I pulled out my pad. I said, all right, tell me how you going to do this.
So it was that quick?
That 2 minutes. So for the next 2 hours, mm-hmm. We went through A, through B, through C, through D. 2 hours turned into 4 hours. 4 hours turned into 6 hours. And by the 6 hour, I said, okay. I mean, in the third hour, actually, that's okay. We got it. Because in my head, I knew it could be done. The question was, how do you can raise the money? How do you raise the money for a commercial airline, which had never been done by a black entrepreneur? But I knew, and he made a good point, we had Maynard Jackson. We had the political clout in terms of here in Atlanta to do an airline. And then we had another secret weapon. My roommate in Washington at the time, I was living in Washington, was George Dowley, who was the first black person appointed by Carter on the Civil Aeronautics Board, which regulated airlines. So all the pieces just fell in place. So that was a great moment. That was a watershed moment for the both of us when we realized that we can put this together, you know.
So let's go back a little bit. So you just probably, listeners have probably got 1,000 questions after you just unpacked that story right there. So first you mentioned on several occasions the role that politics played in this with Jimmy Carter primarily, who's just become president from the state of Georgia, that you all helped get elected, right?
Absolutely.
And without him being in the White House, does this opportunity exist?
No, without him being in the White House, it would not have existed because just like when Maynard Jackson was elected in '73 as mayor, and Maynard demanded a change of modus operandi in the city government where contracts had to have diversity spins into them. That changed the whole paradigm of minority businesses in the United States. That tradition was taken to the White House when Jimmy Carter became president, because the black leadership at that time in Atlanta and in Detroit under Coleman Young and knew what it meant to leverage political power for the economic empowerment of their minority businesses. Okay, so even though federal procurement policy was different, when Jimmy Carter was elect and president, more black people were in the various agencies of the U.S. federal government than any time in history. And we brought those experiences, respectively, in our own individual silos, to what we had learned in Atlanta, what we had learned in Detroit, Los Angeles. But everything started in Atlanta under Maynard Jackson for economic empowerment.
Right.
So Carter had really no choice but to be a proponent of minority economic empowerment. If you go back and look at history, it was during 1977-78 when a young black man who had served with Walter Fauntroy as his chief of staff decided, after Jimmy Carter was elected, and he had and all the black appointees were throughout the federal agency, that he was going to make a gutsy move and start a black television network. BET was born during that time. So you can look at the fact that in those, we use political leverage throughout the bowels of the federal government starting here in Atlanta on a municipal level, and then it migrated to the federal government, and it was because of the great giants like Maynard, okay? The great and his supporting crew of Marvin Arrington on the city council, Morris Findlay, Rob Pitts. All of those guys were advocates that made things happen for black businesses, which went from Atlanta, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, into the federal government. So when Michael made that decision, it really shocked our household because we thought he was going to follow the tradition of our brother, myself, and go to Morehouse. But that was all right. He rationalized it, and it was the best decision from him. He made the right decision. But he was always endearing to Morehouse, inspired by Morehouse, close to Dr. Elijah Benjamin Mays, the famous president of Morehouse College, who was really, Michael was one of Dr. Mays' mentor as a young high school student. And he loved Dr. Mays. And I can recall that when Michael graduated from Dartmouth, one of the things he had them do was to award Dr. Mays an honorary degree, doctorate degree, because Dr. Mays, when he was a young man, which was probably in the 1920s, had applied for a full scholarship at Dartmouth, but they turned him down. And it was primarily racial, okay? And so it was a sweet turn of events that Michael, as a young graduate from Dartmouth, and as president of that class at Morehouse, at Dartmouth, could turn the favor and assist that Dartmouth award him Dr. Mays a honorary doctorate degree. And that was sweet events. That was sweet.
Unbelievable how it came full circle, right?
Right, exactly. That's what life is.
Exactly.
We're all particles and pieces of a great mosaic, And if you believe in God, then the Lord Almighty will guide you. But you got to recognize how you're being guided. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great history there. Great history lesson there.
So we can forgive Michael for not going to Morehouse.
Yeah, we forgave. We forgave.
And so now, so he's at Dartmouth. He's been on the 3 Mile Island Commission.
Right.
You are learning about the global economy in Washington, D.C.
Right.
You all obviously have, that same business mind and connection to where you are the first person he wants to bring this idea to once Carter announces that he's going to deregulate the airline industry.
Correct.
And so in a matter of 2 minutes, you are, maybe 2 minutes to 3 hours, somewhere in there, you are convinced that this is a possibility now, and that you two are the men that can do what has never been done by other black entrepreneurs before. You just got to raise the money. Well, that's one of the things you got to do is raise the money. And I believe it was something like $80 to $100 million you needed to raise. And how old are you all at this point in your life?
He was 27 and I was 30. Yeah.
So still don't know nothing yet in life, right? It's still in those first 3 decades, and you have the audacity, I would say, to think that you two can raise this money and start this airline, and then you did it. So tell me a little bit more about how it went from that idea and that idea came to fruition.
Well, we put pencil to pad. We reached out to the universe and learned, combined the lessons that we learned from my mother and grandmother about perseverance and preparation, and we went to work. We brought in a number of consultants. We started talking to people on Wall Street, started talking to friends, started talking to our friends, political friends here, and we just took no for an answer. For every door that we went through to try to raise the money, every 10 doors, we got rejected by 9.5 of them. So you have to have, as an entrepreneur, you have to have a strong, intense fortitude, belief that you can succeed, especially if you are prepared. Now, if you're not prepared, then that's hollow. But if you're prepared and you can litigate your case in a favorable manner, then you have a better chance of making it. And we were just very determined. So our first investment, we put in a little money between the two of us. But then, to our surprise, Leela Williams, who I mentioned to you earlier in an interview, and my mother put $35,000, which is all the money they had in their retirement account. And they came to us and they said, "Hey, we believe in you. Take this 35." Then, one of those guys, Charles Hopper, who was the regional vice president and union head for the National Alliance of Federal Postal Workers, which was a black postal union. We sat down with him at Leila's Dinette. He agreed to be an advocate for us with his union. 3 months later, his union president, who was based in Washington, Robert White, came down. And to make a long story short, we got our first serious infusion of cash equity from the union. I think it was like $3.5 million or $4 million.
Wow.
And that really was the cornerstone, the rock of Gibraltar that helped us move forward. And we were fortunate to have a variety of friends on Wall Street, on law firms, silk stocking law firms, that realized that after we raised that money, that, hey, wait a minute, these guys may be very onto something here. And that's how we got started here in Atlanta.
So you've got this idea to start an airline. You put pen to paper, and I love what you said about if you're prepared and then you match that with determination,
Right.
You can achieve these audacious goals. And your mother and aunt are the first individuals to put some outside money in all their retirement funds and life savings. But then you go from $35,000 investment to $3 million investment from a black union. I mean, that's impressive. And today, as much money as there is floating around that's available, I still think getting $3.5 million in today's dollars would be a feat. And you all did it in your 20s with an audacious idea. Do you attribute that to your preparation, to your network that you've built? I mean,
Yeah, we contributed to that. To preparation, perseverance, and the network. We've been taught as young, knee-high by our parents, by my mother and grandmother, always develop relationships. Um, and so that was part of our, that was really part of our psyche, man. And that as we met individuals, we always would bank away who they are, and in our own mind, we would start mapping out their relationships with this person, that person, that person, that person. And that was that was important. And as we got deeper into fundraising with other institutional investors like GE, Equitable Insurance Company, which eventually put in about 35 million, and Aetna Insurance Company, Fiji Bank, KLM Airlines, we were looking for ways where, we didn't raise the whole $100 million at one clip, but it was coming in pieces. And so we looked for strategic partners that we could develop relationships with to get the airline started. And at the end of the day, it was a luxury airline. We patented after Swiss Air, which we had first class, business class. We flew to 15 cities around the United States, all first tier cities. Our last year of operations, we flew 1.5 million people out of Hartsfield. So we were creative in terms of our gate space, because before Atlanta, we saw, because we were a struggling airline, we would use gate space. If we got gate space at JFK or gate space for LaGuardia, we would monetize that gate space times when equity with capital was scarce, and use that gate space to leverage financing. Or if our load factors at JFK at one gate was low, and then a KLM wanted additional gate space at JFK, we would sell them that gate space. So we monetized everything we had in terms of the airline assets. We monetized that. When KLM, for example, decided that they wanted to fly cross country from Logan Airport to LAX, we saw an opening. So we reached out to friends on the board of KLM and decided to get KLM to do a code sharing. But for part of that code sharing, we got $10 million investment. Okay? So we used, again, the relationship. And that relationship really came about through a mutual friend of ours who was on the board of Philips Electronics in the Netherlands. KLM is a Dutch airline. And in Europe, there are always cross-fertilizations of boards. Philips owns a piece of KLM, that's the institutional investor. KLM owns a piece of Philips Electronics. But there was a brother who was on the Philips Electronics board that when I called, I said, look, just notice, we did our research and found out that Philips Electronics owns a piece of KLM. So at the end of the day, I called this individual who was our business godfather, Clarence Avon. And Clarence said, oh, well, I don't know. Let me work this out. This is the guy I want you to talk to. He went to his CEO of Philips Electronics. And then from there, we got the right person at KLM.
I hear Clarence was instrumental in a lot of Black entrepreneurs.
Oh, listen, a lot. There is not as a young Black man. We were both extremely blessed to call him a friend and a godfather. Mm-hmm. I can remember as a young man in high school, my junior year in high school, We started a little record company called Quadrant Records with a little group here in Atlanta. And it was during the Johnson years of OEO program, Opportunity Economic Development Program. And they were, and the vehicle here in Atlanta was something called EOA, Economic Opportunity of Atlanta, which was run by a guy by the name of Bill Allison. So as two young men, we knew we gave them a proposal to fund a little record company based on a little group we had. And we got them at 16, 17-year-old to put a commitment of $350,000. This is 1966, 67. So, and that in itself, one of the members in that group that we were producing, we sold about 350,000 records from that, was Reverend Reggie Wilburn. He was the lead singer. You know, he has a big church here now in Atlanta. So through that, I met Clarence Avon in 1967, 68. And Clarence became our friend, our godfather, and there's not a day that went by, not a monthly or quarter, that we didn't talk to Clarence. And it was just not just about business, it was just personal. Mm-hmm. And so Clarence really was like he's the godfather.
Right.
He was our godfather. He was like our father. He got us he set us up. You know, he gave us advice, good advice. We could take some of it, you know, but through his experiences and counsel, you know, it was somebody as young men who was raised by two black women became very important for us.
I thought I was doing so. I raised like 20,000 when I was 19. You talking about you raised 350,000 at 16, 17 years old. That's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it happened. It happened. You if you go to YouTube, you'll see Quadrant Records, and somebody told me about 2 years ago that if you go to YouTube, pull up Quadrant Records, you'll see the record there. You can listen to the music.
Wow. So you raised about $100 million, but I imagine that the money wasn't the only hard part of getting an airline off the ground. What were some of the other challenges that were tough?
Well, the challenge was operationally, you know, in improving the efficiency. You had to assemble a very good group of experts and personnel from top to bottom to the people who load the plane and create those operational efficiencies for the airline to operate. Because you got to remember, running an airline is a from a regulatory standpoint, very, very challenging thing, you know, and you have 100 souls. In our case, we can only have about 100 people on our planes because there were no economy side. And so safety was paramount. If we were if one of those planes had crashed, more than likely, he and I would be in jail today.
Right.
You know, I look at the crash of the plane at the ValueJet plane, mm-hmm. okay, which later transcended itself to AirTran, which is now Southwest. But if we had made one mistake like that, mm-hmm. you know, we would have been out of business, mm-hmm. or probably indicted. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. So we had to assemble a very fluent and efficient staff beyond the bar, and the airline was like that. The food was outstanding. We served food on on China. When you came up to Atlanta Hartsfield, you didn't have to go through the concourse. We had a bus, executive bus, that would take you right to the tarmac and to the plane. And I think about the day because Delta now has this for diamond medallion people. They have you get picked up by a Porsche and taken straight to the plane. Well, we came up with that concept. It just wasn't a Porsche, but it was a bus, executive bus. So we were very innovative in our approach and running the airline and etc. I think we always had one fault line. We made, I think, one mistake, and that mistake was that when Continental Airlines had bought Eastern Airlines, and Frank Lorenzo, who was the CEO of Continental and Eastern, came to us and asked us to buy some of the routes and equipment that of Eastern and Florida, because we were non-union, even though we had a union and money in us. We were at the point where, we constantly raising money, so we couldn't pay union rates, okay? We decided, and this has always been a contention with me and Michael and I, with some on our board at that point, the board decided they did not want to buy those assets from Eastern Airlines. That was a mistake, okay? Because Eastern Airlines, 86, 87, while they were coming to us to buy the slots down in South Florida, they also were going to a real estate developer in New York and entering negotiations to sell their shuttle service from Washington, D.C. to New York to Boston, which became the Trump shuttle.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So it's funny how far things go back and the connectivity and whatnot. And so, part of what I'm hearing is, as we get into the beginning of your story around the airline, that timing was very fortunate as well, in terms of the age of deregulation, the network that you had amassed, the opportunities. You mentioned that you went the luxury route, but your original vision was a low-fare airline, and then you had to pivot away from that, right? And so you were innovative in that approach. But then things start to go in a different direction for the airline. Did timing play a role in that as well, or do you think that other than this buying this route for these routes from Eastern Airlines, are there any other things you could have done to keep the airline afloat? And when did you start to notice that it was heading in that direction?
Well, we really noticed that probably 86, that the airline was moving in another direction, because you got to remember, our load factor was one of the highest in the industry for an airline that size. So some of our institutional investors felt that we, two young black men at that point, we were about 30s, late 30s, had gotten the money from these institutional investors, and now, despite the fact that we were carrying about 1.5 million people, flying from the West Coast to the East Coast to all airports now in Florida, Newark, JFK, New York, Detroit, Chicago, Midway, Houston, that it was time for them to do a coup.
Oh.
And they insisted that we give up control, operational control, in terms of running the airline. We always, we had the vision, but as an entrepreneur, you want to surround your people who may differ with you on certain things, but who have a shared vision. And so we were fortunate enough to surround ourselves with great COOs. The last one being the former head of the Long Island Railroad Company in New York, who had been an executive at TWA. And after he left for retiring, the institutional investors wanted to take over the airline. And that caused splintership on the board. The board wanted us completely out. And despite the fact that we were setting records of passengers load, etc., despite the fact that the board had decided that they did not want to buy Eastern Airlines at a pivotal point. And all that was part of a corporate game. But at the end of the day, the airline filed for bankruptcy in '87, and we stopped flying. Okay, and it was a setback. You know, you can imagine that as late 30s, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38-year-olds who had devoted all of their lives, that had put together a business plan, raised the money, recruited the personnel, put everything together, used the political relationships around the country to get it done, that was a blow. But like the mythical Atlas, every time they knock you down, this is what my mother and grandmother taught, that makes you stronger and you get back. That would have taken us out, but we got back up, and then we started the second chapter of our journey.
Right. So and before we dive into the second chapter, you mentioned numerous challenges and setbacks that you have. What part of that do you think was based on race, or can you remember a specific time that you knew that if you were
well, I think the decision by the majority members who controlled the money on the board about not buying Eastern Airlines, because we could have got their routes for, it was a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
That was somewhat racial. Because at that point, our institutional investors at that point came to realize that, look, wait a minute, this airline can make it. And we want to control it. Now, guys, you've done what you've done. Now it's time for you to go on. But, we didn't fall for that okey doke.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And in the process, the airline went under and was closed. A couple thousand people lost their jobs. But interesting enough, to this day, wherever I go, I see former employees of Airliner who may be still in the airline with a Delta or with Southwest or whoever. They still are very proud of having worked for Airliner.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, if I go on an airplane flying on Delta or whoever, and there's somebody, a passenger on that airline, They asked me, what do you do? Well, I said, we used to be an airline. You just go talk about airlines. They remembered, said, oh, I remember Airline. I remember it was a great airline, one of the better airlines ever. It was the Liberty Pass program. We created an innovative thing called Liberty Pass, where you paid in advance, say, for 5 trips at, say, $2,000, you would get 7 trips, okay? So it was an innovative way for us to also book money, but also, so we created a lot of goodwill. It was a great ride. It was a great ride. Yeah.
Great. And so the airline is filed for bankrupt. And what's going on in your life personally? Had you met your wife yet at that point?
Yeah, I'd met my wife. She was the time we filed for the airline back in 79, 80. She was a staff attorney for the FAA. And she was helpful as we went and got certifications and everything for FAA. So I had met her at that point in my life. But we didn't start having a romantic relationship until the mid 80s. Yeah.
So unforeseen return on investment.
Yeah, unforeseen, but a good return.
Right.
It was a good return.
Right.
Good return.
And what type of, which would probably be more your second chapter, but what type of toll does being a dedicated entrepreneur take on family life?
It takes a toll, but lucky for me, I have a great partner in Julius Hollis, and we have 3 adult kids now who are trailblazers in their own right, and but it took a toll because as a serial entrepreneur, most of the raising of the kids fell on her, even though she was a lawyer, professional as a. But that fell on her because, I traveled extensively around the world, representing, after Atlanta, some of the larger multinationals in the United States and then some in Asia. So I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, structuring deals. And structuring deal for my clients, and those clients usually, in some cases, I would transform them from clients to partners.
Mm-hmm. So I've heard you use the term serial entrepreneur, serial deal maker. How do you define that, and what is it about the deal that attracts you to it?
Well, I go back to the tenets. As an early kid, raised by 2 strong Black women. Be prepared, perseverance, and help those individuals and empower those individuals whatever you do. So, for example, I looked at, I guess this is like 88, 89. I started looking at the whole issue of deregulation of electricity around the world. And during my time at Exim Bank, one of the biggest problems in the underserved markets was the lack of water, the lack of electricity. Because those state-owned enterprises in foreign countries in the Caribbean, South America, and Asia, or Africa, in order to empower their communities, you got to have electricity. You got to have water. And usually, in those state-owned enterprises, they became the dumping ground for political cronyism of people who in those agencies that had those portfolios. So when the U.S. government decided in 88, 89, that U.S. utilities could make investments in electricity assets abroad, I had done my research for a couple of years, and I reached out to the Southern Company here in Atlanta and formed a partnership with them and negotiated with them. They give me first right of refusal on privatization of electricity companies in the Caribbean.
So Airline files for bankruptcy. You're still got your eye on business opportunities.
Right.
You've traveled extensively around the world,
Right.
and you see one of the things that has to be in place, or two of the things that have to be in place, and for a country to empower itself, especially the individuals in that country, is the utilities, especially electricity and water.
Yeah, because electricity and water drives, empowers communities because they can attract industries that would come and put plants there, locate offices there. Water becomes important because water management or wastewater becomes important because it's a national security issue for those countries in terms of a health issue. So I looked at those two industries and then start putting partnerships together. Partnership with Southern, as I indicated. Then we did a partnership, and that partnership still exists today, and with a standalone engineering firm that I have. And we manage municipal assets in about 3 cities in the South. And that standalone asset probably has about 100 people working for it. So, yeah.
And so you that's what you basically spend the 90s doing, is building.
No, that's one of the things.
That's one of the things. Well, what else?
We also formed a partnership with J.P. Morgan Chase. And this is a good example of what I'm talking about. J.P. Morgan Chase, I started out as an advisor to them, a consultant for them, trying to help them look at markets where we could get them into municipal deals. At some point, as an advisor, the delta point becomes where you have diminishing returns as an advisor. So I sat down with the late Bill Gray, Congressman Bill Gray out of Philadelphia, who, when he retired, he went on the J.P. Morgan Chase board of directors. And I sat down with Bill and I said, Bill, I got an idea. Since I'm already an advisor to J.P. Morgan, let me sit down with J.P. Morgan leaders, and let's put a private investment bank together. And that happened. So J.P. Morgan Chase invested in a private investment bank that we owned together. It was their first investment in a black-owned bank at that time, investment bank at that time. We probably did in excess of about $5 billion as senior or co-senior syndication. And we took a gut call. This is the true story. Mm-hmm. We took a gut call, and we went to J.P. Morgan, and we had a put. So we told J.P. Morgan, well, we want to get out of the business, and we have the right because we have a put, so we'll sell it. They hem and haw, why can you sell it when you're at this point? Well, we just felt uneasy about how the indicators went, and we sold it to, love this history. We sold a private investment bank to New Birth Church, the late Reverend Eddie Long, who at that time, Eddie Long, New Birth Church was probably doing $45 million a year revenue, and a year. And he wanted to use our investment banking license that we gladly sold to him as a way to finance the expansion of churches, black or white churches around the country, because one of his there was a multi-billion-dollar company around that was financing the expansion of large churches. So Eddie wanted to get into that, and we sold it to him, and the rest is history.
And so you had a gut feeling that in '08,
we had a gut feeling in '08, if you looked at the economic indicators, that, one thing about the stock market, at that time, derivatives, everything was over-collateralized. There were so many new financial instruments that were being created to leverage debt, to hold debt.
So timing has once again worked out in your favor.
Timing worked out on our favor.
Right.
And then we did another deal with Georgia Pacific Corporation. This is before Georgia Pacific got bought by the Koch brothers.
Mm-hmm.
But while we were buying the Trinidad Power Company, electricity company, I knew that Trinidad was the biggest producer of methanol in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They produce more methanol in the world. And at that time, methanol was used as a blend in gasoline by the EPA. Okay? And I had a good friend on the board at Georgia Pacific. They had me sit down with Marshall Hahn, who was at that time CEO and chairman. We worked the deal. I took them to Trinidad. They had to put up an irrevocable letter of credit, which was at risk of $25 million, to bring the methanol in from Trinidad into Norfolk, Virginia. And so we ruffled some feathers of some global brokers of methanol. And the rest is history. Georgia Pacific got to this day, that was 1997. They renewed that contract for 10 years. They're still bringing in methanol from Trinidad, even though methanol price has dropped, And it's, so we look at, what we've been very blessed to look 3, 4, 5 years threads, and then see where we want to, what multinationals we'd like to start out on advising, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, how can we translate that advisory work into a strategic partnership?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I'm noticing that you had a lot of relationships with key individuals on board. So once again, tapping into that network.
Hey, listen, that is key. We learned that from a dear friend who I give credit to. He taught us that. And so we called on friends on those boards who legitimized us, opened the doors for us with some of these CEOs. And over the years, we've been able to harvest from those relationships. Okay? And in the process, help to create indirectly thousands of jobs. I mean, one of my clients, they won a contract last year with our help to do about $1 billion of work, disaster relief work in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
They
were getting ready to go to another direction. I said, no, let me take you to U.S. Virgin Islands and let's put a program together. And they got to work.
When I hear you talk about $1 billion numbers and $250 million numbers and what have you. I remember I was fortunate enough to have been friends with Michael, and I remember him saying to me that it takes just as much work for a $1 billion idea as it does for $1 million idea.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you might as well play big.
You got to play big. You got to go long. You got to play big. You got to go long. You got to go. You got to go for the wall. Michael was a slugger,
Mm-hmm.
and he would always go for the wall.
And so, in this last decade, you've still been focused on entrepreneurial partnerships and endeavors, but you also took the opportunity to write in the arena to tell the story about your brother who passed away to prostate cancer in the early 2010s. Tell me a little bit about what motivated you to do that, and what you remembered and why you wanted to write that book.
Well, the book is In the Arena, The High-Flying Life of Airline founder Michael Hollis. And incidentally, you can order it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's a fascinating book. The joys, the disappointments, the history. And so as he was getting ready to transition, because he had been diagnosed with not prostate cancer, but pancreatic cancer 2 years earlier. My mother, who was also in declining health, and I was sitting down, and she said, "Look, you need to tell the story. And I want you to make that commitment that you'll tell the story." So when she died, I was in Dubai as a guest of Muhammad Ziyad, the ruler of Dubai. I got a call, and my wife told me that my mother had died. I got on the plane 2 days later. And on that long flight from Dubai, I started planning my mother's funeral. And halfway through the trip, I took the pen back up and I said, well, I might as well start planning his funeral, Michael Hollis's funeral, because I knew, as close as he was to our mother, that he would not be around long. And he died 3 months later after we buried her. So I remember what my mother had told me: tell the story.